Karen, quick question before we even say hello to everyone out there. Have you ever been sitting across from a client's team and just you sense something was wrong? Not a fire, not a scandal, not a big crisis to handle, but just a room full of people who looked fine, but you knew somehow they weren't.
Yeah, constantly. And you know what? I just discovered there's a name for it now, and
Ooh.
there's data behind it, which is why we are doing this episode on it. So, welcome back to That Solo Life, the podcast for independent PR and communication pros who are building a business. I'm Karen Swim, president of Solo PR Pro.
And I'm Michelle Kane, the principal of Voice Matters. It's just the two of us today again. No guest because this one's been sitting in our notes for a few weeks and we just really wanted to get into it. Now we have some research to back it up. And so we're going to talk about that and what we've been noticing in our day to day.
Yeah. So today we're talking about this trend of quiet cracking. And I know you guys don't, before you groan and go, oh God, and another quiet something, let's be clear. This is not quiet quitting rebranded. It's different. And it's an honestly more useful thing to understand if you're a solo PR or communications pro.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, let's get into what is the actual difference.
Yeah. So quiet quitting, I think, was more behavioral. It was like
Yeah.
people doing the bare minimum on purpose. Quiet cracking is about people who are still showing up, they're still performing, and sometimes really well, but they're under pressure. They're uncertain about their job security or unclear on what's expected of them. They're not checked out. They're just cracking quietly while still holding it together on the surface.
And that, I think that's more common than we probably realize. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying, haven't been there. And that's a very different situation or problem to be having when especially when you're walking into a client meeting, right?
Yeah, it really is. And there's a 2026 workplace research report called Talent Trends. And in their survey, they found that 54% of the people said that they've experienced some level of quiet cracking. One in five said they experience it frequently or constantly.
That that makes sense. In fact, my guess would be it's probably a little higher. There were probably some people reluctant to admit it, and so that's well over half. So that's not just some fringe experience. That's real stuff. It's the majority of us. Yay.
Exactly. And I mean, it's not just one report either. So Gallup's own numbers on this show that only 31% of US employees were actively engaged at work in 2025, which is, under a third.
Wow. So, a quick sourcing note before we go further, because we know we always do this. We want to make sure we have facts. We're PR, we love our facts. But some of these numbers are from that talent trends report specifically, but a couple of regional figures we found alongside it. And we're still working through our verification process, so we're leaving those out of today's conversation. But
Yeah.
as always, the sourcing notes with links to what we did confirm will be in our show notes.
Thank you for that, Michelle. We always want to be transparent with our audience and not just throw out numbers. Uh,
No.
Okay, so here's why we think that this is a story for you all, our solo PR, that solo life audience, and more than just a HR headline. When a
Mm.
workforce is quietly cracking, the people experiencing it are also the people who talk. They talk to friends, to Glassdoor, to LinkedIn, to reporters who cover their industry. And meanwhile, the company's external messaging is very often saying the opposite of what's happening inside.
Oh, yeah. It's the "Our people are our greatest asset" line while, on their careers page, while the actual people inside are barely holding on, and not for nothing, I don't understand these companies because the people inside can see the disconnect.
Yeah, that's the say-do gap, right? And,
Mhm.
in the past, it would take a scandal or, a mass layoff for that gap to really become visible externally. But now it leaks constantly in small ways all the time, like a leaky faucet that just drips away. And, the reason that happens is because we all have a publishing platform in our pocket.
Yeah, we do. So let's walk through specifically, why that's our lane specifically. Because I can already hear some of our listeners saying or thinking, I'm an external comms person. This sounds like an HR or a culture consultant's job to worry about.
Yeah, and that's fair pushback. So
Mhm.
let's come back to that specific pushback in a minute because it's objection number one. But the short
Mhm.
version is if you already do executive communications, thought leadership, or employer brand messaging for a client, you're already standing in the exact spot where internal reality and external narrative either line up or they don't. So you don't need to become an HR consultant. You need to start asking a question that you maybe were not asking before.
True, true. Which is?
The question is what you're telling the outside world about this company's culture and people hold up if they looked inside of it right now? That's it. That's the whole starting point.
Yeah, and I love that because it's not go fix their culture, right? It's go check whether your external story is actually true. Are you walking your talk, which is squarely a comms function?
Yeah. And I mean, when leadership communication is unclear internally during a period of change, like restructuring, layoffs, and return to office mandates, all of these things that are happening right now, that kind of uncertainty is a huge driver of quiet cracking. People crack quietly when they don't know what's happening and nobody in charge is telling them clearly. That's a communications failure before it's anything else.
And that's the real work here, right? Leadership communications, coaching, internal messaging audits. Heck, having internal messaging. How many companies do we know that just have flimsy to non-existent internal comms?
Yeah.
Um, you know, change communications during a transition. It's things we talk about all the time. You've got to be telling your story before others do it. And in this case, it's the people that work for you will be telling your story because they're seeing what the story really is.
Yeah. And I mean, the funny thing is that employers know this. They
Mhm.
even if they don't have the language, maybe they don't know what's quiet cracking, but they know something is off because roughly half of the employers in the research are already exploring career development initiatives, and about a third are investing in leadership training. So that feels like they're reaching for something. And as comms pros, we can be part of what they're reaching for.
Exactly, exactly. So let's jump into some of this pushback, right? Because I already flagged one and I know our community will have more.
Go ahead. Hit me.
Okay, so objection 1, the one I mentioned. I'm an external PR person. This isn't my lane. I'll get pulled into the HR issues that I don't want or I don't feel quite equipped to fix.
Okay. So that's a fair point, but here's the boundary. You're not there to fix the culture. You're there to do a narrative alignment check. And that is, in fact, that's a very native task for communication professionals. And then you refer out anything that's genuinely an HR or organizational psychology issue. Know your lane, stay in it, but don't assume that the lane doesn't touch this topic at all because it does.
Yeah, true, true. Okay. Your Honor, objection 2. And yeah, eh, you know, this may feel like scope creep waiting to happen, right? It's like, whoa, we didn't. I didn't really this was not in my proposal, right? I'll get pulled into fixing culture or problems that I was not hired to touch, and by not hired to touch, I mean, I'm not getting paid to touch.
Yeah, so same answer, okay, but,
Yeah.
from a slightly different angle. This is the scoping conversation that you have up front. You're not signing up to run, like, engagement surveys or redesign benefits. You're really offering a very specific, bounded deliverable, a message and narrative audit. So, maybe a leadership communications coaching session or 2, but if it opens the door to bigger retained work, wonderful, but the initial offer stays narrow on purpose.
Yeah, that sounds good. I mean, I not things directly like this, but this stuff happens all the time. All right. If Your Honor would be so kind. Objection 3. Sorry. Listening to too much Nancy Grace lately. Objection 3, and I think this is the one that's going to come up the most with our listeners. Um, that quiet cracking, is this gonna be another buzzword that comes and goes, like 100 other workplace TikTok trends?
Yeah. It's funny because I don't know that this happens in other countries, but, we love to name stuff here in
Mm,
America. We name,
true.
crime sprees, we name everything. There's a name for everything. So I I totally understand why our audience would think that. But here's the thing. The underlying data about this, it's not new or trendy. It's a continuation of engagement numbers that have been low for years. So Gallup's been tracking disengagement for a long time, and it continues to not get better. So
Mhm.
quiet cracking is just the label that's attached to this persistent, well documented problem for this particular research cycle. So, yes, the name might fade away, but the underlying issue, it's not going away anytime soon.
Yeah, that makes sense, and that's a good distinction. So, here's the one that's the quiet one that nobody says out loud. Am I building up enough suspense?
Yeah.
Okay, so if I bring this up with a client, am I not basically telling them that their company is falling apart or, they're wrong, you're doing bad things to your company? Which, if this is happening, I can think of one case in particular where this is actually happening. That's an awkward, maybe even insulting conversation to start, which could put your whole relationship in jeopardy.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't lead with this, and you can't
Yeah,
frame it as an accusation like,
right.
"Hey, love to work with you, your company sucks." So don't. So what you're doing it so here's what you do. You can frame it as market context, right? Not as a diagnosis of them specifically, but you can talk about like, here's a trend that's showing up across industries right now. I wanted to flag it and ask a couple of questions. And that is gonna, land completely differently than, "Hey, your people are quietly falling apart and it's your fault." So, and, listen, these actually, I'm gonna let you guys in on a little secret. These are my favorite kind of client engagements. These are so rich
Mhm.
and so layered and really allow you to truly like pull out your strategy muscles and use them in ways that you see
Mhm.
real change. To add a little layer to this, me personally, I always also frame this in the proactive crisis category.
There you
So
go.
this is guarding against that internal, bumping up against external in a time when you really need external messaging to land and it being diminished because the realities don't match each other.
Yeah, yeah, and I agree. It's such an important, reframe because you don't wanna walk into the room and say, "You're being really crappy to your people. By the way, here's my invoice."
Yeah.
And I think approaching it from a way that doesn't put them on defense right away is, of course, the smart thing to do, and this is where we become, this is why we're part psychologists and therapists for our clients sometimes, but, Anyway, so moving on. Let's give people something to actually do with this, right? Because be aware of quiet, say it, say it 20 times fast. Be aware of quiet cracking is an inaction.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, we came up with like this little 3-question filter, and you can, run this on existing client relationship, or you can use
Mm,
it in your discovery cost. So, the first question filter is there a gap between what this company says about its culture and people externally and what you would actually find if you talk to employees? And that's the say do gap check.
love it. Love it. Question two.
Is leadership communicating clearly right now about anything that would create
Mm,
uncertainty? Whether that's restructuring, return to office changes, because those are still happening, layoffs, a merger, and I mean, a rocky quarter. Like, so unclear leadership communications during uncertainty is honestly one of the biggest drivers of this, right? If the answer is no, actually they're pretty quiet about all of that, then that's your opening.
yeah, yeah, true. And question number three.
Okay, so with a light touch audit, not a full culture overhaul, just a message and narrative review, surface something useful for them. And
Mm,
if all three of these questions, if the answer is yes, then now you have a real offer that you can bring to that client.
yeah, yeah. All right. So let's run a drill. I feel like I'm at basketball camp. Now, so let's, not that I've ever done that. Say, say a listener has done B2B tech, B2B tech PR for years, and one of their retained clients just went through a round of quiet layoffs. No public announcement, just suddenly people are poofing, disappearing off of the company Slack. Yet the company's careers page still says, we invest in our people.
Yeah, that's such a great example. Seen that so many times. So
Mhm.
in this one, the say-do gap is glaring, right? And the public messaging and the internal reality are contradicting each other right now. So big yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And then question two, leadership communication during the layoffs.
Yeah, if it so there's
Yeah.
2 in my mind, there's 2 kind of quiet layoffs. So if it was a quiet layoff without any clear internal explanation, then that's where this uncertainty vacuum we're talking about, comes into play. People
Yeah.
that are left behind are definitely quietly cracking because they're
Sure.
wondering, are they next? So they're doing their
Yeah.
jobs while they're panicking. And I mean, can I just tell you how unsettling it is, not only for employees, but for any partners that you work with, to all of a sudden have people not be on meetings, disappear from teams, disappear from Slack
Yeah.
channels with no explanation. And I've seen that happen, and it's not
Yep.
good.
Yep. Yep. And I think we've both either experienced or witnessed situations where, it's human nature. It does not take much to shake the confidence of employees when they see unexplained change going on because let's face it, corporate America, the track record's not great for change being good. But anyway, moving on. Question three, would an audit help in this situation?
Yeah, I think absolutely. So, and this is kind of a natural like add-on to existing, work that you're doing. So, you can say something like, I noticed the careers page messaging hasn't been touched since before the
Mhm.
reorganization or before the, whatever happened. Do you
Yeah,
want me to take a look at that and, determine whether or not it still reflects where you are? So that's not so scary, right? And that's a normal scope conversation because we as, comms pros for our clients, we should be looking at all of the messaging touch points.
that's so true. And I love it because it's not like a cold pitch. You're not throwing cold water on them. Um, and in fact, you may be triggered. They honestly, because with everything else they may be, dealing with, they may not have even considered that. That's why we exist.
I agree, and isn't that, one of the greatest ways to have new work happen? It's
Mhm.
it's not from a pitch deck, but it's just by noticing and,
Yeah,
letting your client know that you're noticing, and that to me that is the heart of a solo PR pro. We actually care, so we pay attention to things, but paying attention can be more than just us being great at our jobs. It can
right.
also lead to deepening that relationship with our clients.
Yeah, definitely, and that certainly builds trust, I think. But so as we head towards wrapping this episode up, let's tie this back, right?
Yeah.
Why does this matter beyond one client engagement?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think because there's something that's beneath this that connects us to not just our clients. A lot of us went solo partly because we didn't want to be inside of a workplace that was quietly cracking. And now here we are watching that same dynamic play out for the people that we serve. So it's a good reminder that the isolation and uncertainty we help clients name in their organizations is kind of worth naming for ourselves too. So none of us should be figuring out how to spot this stuff completely alone.
So true, so true, and that's exactly what the Solo PR Pro community is for. Bring this one into our community, our private Facebook group if you're a member, and if you're not a member, you should be a member. If you're sitting with a client where you're seeing these early signs of quiet cracking, you know, let's hash through it together.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, you can also we have a perfectly free LinkedIn group, but you can also hit us
Mhm.
up, on socials. You can send us an email directly if you really are experiencing this or something around this or any other challenge and you want, some one-on-one help, we are absolutely here for that.
You know it. Yes. So that's it for this episode. If this got you looking sideways at a client's careers page, we want to hear about it. Show notes, sourcing links, and everything else will be available for this episode at thatsololife.com.
Yeah. And if you've got a client and the external and the internal aren't quite matching right now, don't worry. Not a reason to panic. It's a reason to ask a few good questions.
Indeed. So until next time.
Take care of yourselves out there, solo pros.